Okay, hi everyone once again. Today I'm going to record an annotation and a discussion of Macleod's The Tuning of Perfection on page 271, written in 1984. This one has quite a different feel, I think, to some of the others that we've looked at so far. For one thing, it's written in third person, which you'll notice straight away. It starts, he thought of himself in the middle of that April as a man who had made it through another winter. Already right from the beginning you've got he. We know later on, of course, that his name is Archibald, but right at the beginning he is, like an honest man, a man without an identity, and so it creates a bit more of a mysterious air for the reader to ponder and consider as they make their way into the story. A man who had made it through another winter, that's how he sees himself. That's not a man celebrating or taking things for granted. It's a man who understands that in living amongst nature, it's always going to be the case that there are threats, and he's known enough tragedy too in his life that he knows that illness can strike at any time, and that making it through another winter is a great triumph in itself and a real achievement. He sees things 1 year or one set of seasons at a time. Now we see from the beginning he's 78 years old, and it seems best to give his exact age now rather than trying to rely on such descriptions as old or vigorous. He's a very precise man, as you find. He's very clear about how he needs to organise things, about how his life needs to run in order to make the most of it and to be as efficient as possible. We move on, and Macleod says he was frequently described as neat. And there's a few physical descriptions there about his suspenders, keeps his trousers in line, always wore shoes. This is a man who lives alone and has lived alone for much of his life, but at no point does he live like someone who can do whatever he wants because no one's around. He has very high standards for himself and presumably for others, and very, very clear rules that he lives by. And you'll notice right from the beginning that's how he goes about his life. Moving on to page 272, we're introduced to the fact that he built the house himself when he was a young man, before he was married. Even as a young man, it's like he has an old man's head on his shoulders. He wanted to build the house, he wanted everything to be right before he took his wife there. And also we learn that he lives in an area different to the areas others are in. He lived to live alone near the top of the mountain in a house which he himself had built. He's near the top of the mountain, and this whole story, to me, has this air. It's a great metaphor of this man up in those parts of the mountain that are virtually inaccessible, and he looks down and he observes and he considers the world that he lives in, but he is isolated himself and doesn't involve too many others in his daily life. We learn that his family had come from the Isle of Skye, once again, from the UK, people who have come from somewhere and brought their traditions, their habits, their values and views with them, and it's up to us to have a look and see how they are adjusted in the new country, what changes have to be made or whether they can be left whole and the new country has to adapt to them. It says, one considered that he had been granted a great deal of land and there were more accessible spots upon it where one might build a house. Others thought that because of the violence he had left in Scotland, he wanted to be inaccessible in the new world. So people were already, through the generations, considering this family and their oddness and the decisions that they made, discussing them, evaluating them. And I like the line just towards the bottom of 272. Perhaps the theory of the view proved the most enduring because although the man from Skye and the house he built were no longer visible, the view still was. That there's still an air of the man that was there, but he's long since gone. The idea of leaving a legacy, leaving something behind that people remember you by. Now, I need to make clear here, we're talking about different houses. The first house, the old house, doesn't exist anymore, but its location was there, and it was built by his great-grandfather, who began this series of building homes that are quite remote, that people pondered on and wondered why that particular spot, what was good about it for a family. There's a great deal of description of the terrain, of the geography in this story. You already know that Macleod presents great visual images for the reader to picture and imagine, but certainly in this one you can't finish the story without having a really detailed understanding of what the land is like, emphasising how important it is to the characters and the role that it plays in their lives. On 273, once there had been a great deal of traffic on such paths, people on foot and people with horses, but over the years, as more and more people obtained automobiles, the paths fell into disuse and became overgrown. On 274, it's mentioned that whenever the issue of making a private section of the road public was raised, there were always counter petitions that circulated and used phrases like "keeping the land of our fathers ours." That's a really great quote. It's making it clear that people, generation after generation, still have that very strong adherence to the ways of the past, and believe also very, very passionately that what was their forefathers should belong to them and should not be interfered with. It's not something that's fleeting. It should be maintained through the generations as a legacy or as an inheritance to all the younger people, even though it becomes clear that the younger people aren't as interested as the older ones. The relationship between Archibald and his wife begins on 274. We learn he was filled with the fever of his approaching marriage. Right from the beginning, this man was so self-motivated and so focused on building a life, marrying and having a family, and it just builds up the tension so that when tragedy strikes, it's all the more painful. Also, even in terms of building the house, Macleod says Archibald was working at it in determined perfection in the company of his twin brother and getting the others only when it was absolutely necessary for the raising of the roof beams and the fitting of the gables. Obviously, those are jobs that you need an extra man for. They would have only had certain types of tools, and some things just need two people. But it's clear that almost begrudgingly Archibald invited people in to help him because presumably he wanted this house to be his own creation and built from his own sweat and effort. Back to the relationship with his wife. He and his wife had been the same age and were almost consumed by one another when they were still quite young. Think of the power of that. Almost consumed by one another. That's establishing the power of their relationship and their involvement. I also feel that as people, they suited each other down to the ground. There's not that many people who would have wanted to marry Archibald in terms of him being set in his ways and having a very specific world view. Neither had ever had another boyfriend or girlfriend, but he had told her that they would not marry until he had completed the house. He wanted the house so that they could be alone together as soon as they were married. So he was a very proud man, a man who, even as a very young man, was aware that what he wanted, what he needed for happiness, was privacy, was solitude, and was peace. But of course his beloved wife was to be included in that. She was the only one. Of course, children as well when they came along, but you can see right from the beginning he had a plan and he worked that plan. He had worked at it determinedly and desperately, anticipating the time when he could end his life and begin their lives. It's a fantastic way of putting it. So he saw his life in different sections before marriage and after marriage, but on the border between those two came the building of the house. Another example of the old ways that he was adopting, even back then when he was building. Deciding also to use wooden pegs in the roof timbers instead of nails, so that the house would move in the mountain's winds like a ship move but not capsize, move yet still return. You can almost hear the creaking in the wind of that house, built perfectly for the environment, but also built based on ideas about technology from long ago. His wife was also an equal partner. She did different things, but she contributed just as he did. When her father suggested she was doing too much masculine work, she had replied, "I'm doing what I want to do. I'm doing it for us." Us means her and her husband-to-be, but also perhaps the family of the future. She's thinking exactly as Archibald is. They are a perfect match. We move along here we include the other theme that recurs throughout this story about music and the importance of folk songs and things from the past, language and tunes and music from the past. During the building of their house, they often sang together, and the language of their singing was Gaelic. They sang together. There wasn't a lot to entertain them, but it brought them great happiness. You can see also, as we find out, Archibald is a very talented singer, and so the music was beautiful. Sometimes one of them would sing the verses and the other the chorus, and at other times they would sing the verses and choruses together and all the way through. On clear, still days, all the people living down along the mountainside and even below in the valley could hear the banging of their hammers and the youthful power of their voices. Again, I want you to think and picture in your own mind, they're at the top of the mountain, they're almost like at the top of their own world, and others can hear, others know that they're there. It's not like they don't involve themselves at all, but they live this very private life, this life that they are designing around exactly what it is they want and how they want it to be. And to Archibald, that was perfection. Also perfect was the arrival of the first daughter and then the second daughter, everything moving along exactly as he would have liked it to. Everyone healthy, and he went away to work. It's a beautiful series of images with the horses' bells, and you can think of it from the perspective of his wife or from Archibald, but with the sound of the bells, she would hear them. Although the climb was steep, the horses would walk faster because they knew they were coming home. Anyone with horses knows that happens, but you can imagine the excitement and the joy of getting near enough and the bells signalling to the person at home that the husband was coming now. Also, sometimes he would get out of the wood sleigh and run beside the horses or ahead of them in order to keep warm and also to convince himself that he was getting home faster. You know, this is the thoughts of the young man who's been working so hard physically, but coming home to the woman that he loves. And he just can't wait to get there, knowing that she is missing him just as much. In addition to that, the image you can picture of her moving the lamps from window to window. The effect was almost that of a regular flashing light, like that of a lighthouse or someone flicking a light switch off and on. Again, the lighthouse, the nautical imagery, we had the nails from the ship. This is all referring to things from the past that both he and his wife would have known about, stories that they would have heard, and also stories that they would have heard about the country their forebears came from grandparents and in the songs that they sung. He would see the light now at one window and then the other, sent down like the regulated flashing signals his mares gave off. He would be filled with desire and urge himself upwards at an even greater rate. His youth, his energy, this was a time in his life that he remembers so well because everything was exactly as he'd hoped it would be. The image of the eagles is one that recurs throughout this story. Only the monogamous eagles who nested in the hemlock tree even farther up the mountain seemed above them. It's interesting to look at that and to consider that these people are living very much nestled in nature and living off nature and living in great harmony with nature. Again, harmony and the music and so on are recurring themes. But he is able to observe the eagles, and it's like he can consider their lives and reflect upon his own. Again, emphasising the passion and desire in their relationship. They were married for 5 years in an intensity which it seemed could never last, going more and more into each other and excluding most others for the company of themselves. They were perfect for each other. This was like a miracle that it had happened and they'd found each other, but they'd found each other from an early age, and what they did was work towards creating that world, that life that they wanted. And then we come to a real tonal change where it's described he'd lost his wife and what might have been his firstborn son. He receives that information from his twin brother, and from then on everything changes. Towards the bottom of 277 he says he could not believe it, could not believe that she had somehow gone without him, could not believe that in their closeness he was still the last to know, and that in spite of hoping to live alone together, she had somehow died surrounded by others but without him and really alone in the ultimate sense. I think when you read this story, when you get to that point, you realise afterwards that Archibald's life changes from there. That was a turning point that had such a significant impact on him. It's like much of his happiness stopped from then on, and he continued to exist but did not thrive in any sense of the word. Also, he could not believe that in the closeness of their beginning there had been separation in their end. And this is very early as well. It's they've only been married for a few years, but to have been wrenched apart so suddenly and without warning just emphasises the tragedy that he has suffered. The storyteller tells you his wife's sisters looked after his 3 small daughters who, while they sometimes called for their mother, seemed to almost to welcome the lavish attention visited upon them. And you can see that the girls gradually are drawn away from their father. After the death of his brother, the numbness continued. He felt as those who lose all of their family in the midnight fire or on the sinking ship, suddenly and without survivors. He felt guilt for his wife and for his brother's fatherless children and for his daughters who would now never know their mother, and he felt terribly alone. And so sadly, but really quite matter-of-factly, someone would have to look after 3 children under the age of 4, and it's decided that they're better off not living with their father, who is trying to earn a living. Just down the bottom of 279. And then they began to call him Archibald, as did the other members of the households in which they lived, so that in the end he seemed neither husband nor brother nor even father, but only Archibald. He was 27 years old. So he was that young, he had a family, he'd lost a family, and his role changed completely. He'd only been a father for such a short period of time, but it's been decided that it's better for him to be earning and supporting his family in that way. And from this moment on, we sense a real disconnect between himself and his children. He becomes much more just a solitary individual living his life alone. On 280, we learn that as a singer, he develops a level of local fame amongst folklorists who discovered him and is regarded as the last of the authentic old-time Gaelic singers. Remember the singing in the boat, the sense that there's a curiosity value to the old traditional ways, and singing those old Gaelic songs is one of those things that people from the modern generations look at in an interested but uninvolved way. Interestingly, we have a change in perspective towards the bottom of 280. Now, in this April of the 1980s, he thought of himself, as I said earlier. Who's saying? Well, it's the narrator telling this story who is never identified as a man who had made through another winter. Again, it's just one winter, 1 year at a time, with no real anticipation that it's open-ended or going on forever, but each year is an achievement. But still, it says he had come to terms with most things, although never really with the death of his wife. But that too had become easier during the last decades. So, as an older man, he's learning to accept things, though he's still quite troubled by them. Time shift again from the present to the past to a time when his twin brother's wife suggests it's time me and you got together, as if that's like something Archibald had declared an interest in. Of course he hadn't. He was still, in his mind, completely committed to his wife. But Cora seems to be able to move on fairly rapidly. And she's a fairly basic woman in her ways and in her habits and expression. Here, have a shot of this. It'll put lead in your pencil. We can almost feel Archibald cringing at her lack of politeness and her brusqueness. This is not the kind of thing he would have been interested in discussing, and certainly he wouldn't be interested in spending time with women who spoke in such a base manner, so different from his beloved wife. Towards the bottom of 281, he was close to panic, finding her so lonely and so drunkenly available, and so much unlike the memory of his own wife. And he wondered if he were somehow thought of as being interchangeable with his dead brother, as if, because they were twins, their bodies must somehow be the same regardless of their minds. I would think you can feel his slight panic and his desperate desire to get out of that situation. She's totally misunderstood and miscalculated what she can expect from him. Cora leaves with just getting answers that were really unsatisfactory to her, but clearly embarrassed and withdrawn answers, though making it apparent to her that he was not interested in her offer and there would be no point in repeating it, though hopefully she says, well, you know where I am at. Yes, I know where you are. We move on to a visit from Sal, again a different kind of woman, his granddaughter, hair in a ponytail, although she seemed too old for that on 283. He was always surprised, at her ability to chew gum and smoke cigarettes. She's wearing a tight-fitting T-shirt with the words "I'm busted," and she greets him with, "Hi, Archibald." This is his granddaughter. These are women unlike the women that he so adores, like his wife. And times are changing. Sal represents a new generation who are interested in singing the old tunes only in terms of the benefits that they can get, the opportunities that it might draw to them. She says, bottom of 284, in trying to convince her grandfather to join the group, "Oh, who cares? It's a trip that's important. Some of the old songs, they're coming to audition us or something." But she is family and she does evoke some memories in him. Only when she sang did she remind him somewhat of his wife, and again he felt the hope that she might reach that standard of excellence. Again, it's such a contrast against the description Macleod has created of this girl, which is all fairly simple and straightforward and not of the quality that Archibald has expressed in terms of his lost wife. Sal makes it clear again that she doesn't understand the words of the songs and she doesn't care, that it's really just about the sound. Archibald wants it to be sung authentically, reflecting the stories that are being told from the past, from people long since gone. Again, in combination with that T-shirt she's wearing, Sal has a pretty straightforward bumper sticker, "If you're horny, honk your horn." Again, reminding Archibald that even though they're family, there's a very big gap between how he sees the world and how they do. Carver comes into the story bringing a man to buy a horse. Carver's described as a violent young man in his 30s from the other side of the mountain. His not unhandsome face was marred by a series of raised grey scars, and his upper lip had been thickened as a result of a fight in which someone had swung a logging chain into his mouth. Archibald is preparing to sell the horse, and he's happy to do it, but is quite disturbed by the purpose that it's alleged that the horse will be put. Carver talks to Archibald about the old days. He seems to really admire him. He says, top of 289, I heard guys say you and your brother could cut 7 cords of pulp a day with a crosscut saw, haul it and stack it. Oh yes, says Archibald. Some days we could. Days seemed longer then. He's a very modest, self-effacing man, not boastful. Again, in terms of Archibald's living in harmony with nature, with the environment, Carver observes other people say, that Archibald, no one knows where he gets all them logs, hauls them out with the horses and doesn't seem to disturb anything. Year after year, treats the mountain as if it were a garden. Because of his level of skill, because of his focus and commitment to not damaging the environment, he lives in a way far more in tune with nature than others do, and they marvel at what he has done. But after that exchange, Carver reveals they want her for birth control pills, talking about the horse. He says they keep them bred all the time and they use their water for birth control pills. And when Archibald is disturbed at this and says, what do they do with the colts? I don't know, says Carver. I guess they just throw them away. And Archibald again thinks of this new generation and a reluctance to look at the value of nature and of animals and to make best use of the death of an animal rather than just being wasteful. Towards the bottom of 290. For a long time, Archibald did not know what to do. He felt somehow betrayed by forces he could not control. He imagined them as many dead, unwanted animals he had seen thrown out in the manure piles behind the barns, their skulls smashed in by blows from axes. He doubted that there was anything like that outside of Montreal. And that evokes in him memories of the past. He thought, as he always did at times of loss, of his wife, and then of the pale, still body of his quiet and unbreathing son, with the intricate blue veins winding like the maps of roads and rivers upon his fragile, delicate skull. Both wife and son gone from him, taken in the winter's snow, and he felt somehow that he might cry. As we move on in the story, the competition emerges between Archibald's wing of the family and a group that Carver has put together. The young and the old, the traditional and the modern. Really, though, Archibald is the only one who cares deeply about the significance of the songs. All the younger people involved are just interested in the opportunities, money and fame it's going to bring them. This kind of crassness is emphasised by the producer on 296 who comes to audition him. He had dark curly hair and wore thick glasses and a maroon T-shirt with, if you've got it, flaunt it, emblazoned across the front. This is not Archibald's kind of person. This is another interloper from an outside world coming into his life that he doesn't quite understand. And the producer makes it very clear, look, I really don't understand your language, so we're here mainly to look for effect. But Archibald is still, he still finds magic in the music. By the 12th verse, the music took hold of Archibald in a way that he had almost forgotten it could. His voice soared above the others with such clear and precise power that they faltered and were stilled. The producer emphasises the importance of Archibald heading the group. He says, you have a presence on 301. If you'll pardon me, they're kind of ordinary. And then there's your reputation. You're known to the folklorists and people like that. You have credibility, very important. You know, not realising at all that part of Archibald's persona and the way he is as a man is not something that he's created or put together for effect or for benefit or for advantage. It is the way he is, and to use it for gain or to profit from, to Archibald himself would be absolutely repugnant. When Archibald breaks the news to Sal after a lot of thought that he's not going to participate or he's not going to allow himself to be used by the TV producers, he decides to walk home, doesn't want a lift, and began to walk up the mountain with an energy and purpose that reminded him of himself as a younger man. He had felt that he was right in the way he had felt so many years before when he had courted his future bride and when they had decided to build their house near the mountaintop, even though others were coming down, 305. And he felt that he had felt as he had felt during the short and burning intensity of their brief life together. He began almost to run. He is a man who sticks by his principles and he doesn't waver. And it reminds him, when he does act instinctively in this way, of the young man he used to be and the man he still is inside. Carver and his misunderstanding of Archibald is represented by that final scene where Archibald feels like people are coming to get him to cause damage and harm to him, and Carver just comes in with alcohol with his friends as a gift. Shows the big the large distance between the generations and the understanding of older people and their values, and just makes it really clear how things have changed, and long after Archibald is gone, young people won't understand him and his values. That's what the story is focusing on, the idea of the loss of the old, the loss of understanding, and the fact that new generations, if they don't really inquire with the older people about what was important to them and why they lived their lives the way that they did, that it's just going to be lost, and no use will come of it at all. At the end, Carver tries to suggest that he understands the old man, but I think we're left, even with Carver saying we really know. As readers, we're left with the feeling that he doesn't know it all, that he's in things for a quick buck, and he'll sell his culture in order to gain whatever it is he's after. Archibald is not that kind of a man, and Archibald, throughout much of the story, is an old man that we feel, though living year to year, does not have a great deal more time, and men like him, once they're gone, those kinds of characters, they're not being born and growing up in the area anymore. He's the last of a particular breed. Okay, that's it for the tuning of perfection. Try and think of the metaphors that I've talked about, the motifs with the birds, the description of nature, the use of music and song, the nautical references about ships and so on. Please come to terms with the relationship between Archibald and his wife. And as you finish the story, think about, put the book down, draw back and think about what images you're left with this man living in isolation at the top of the mountain, but not unhappy, a man so completely at home with himself and what he believes in, a man living in harmony, in concert with nature, but a man who's living in great contrast to the following generations. And is that Macleod warning us about the folly of that kind of life, of those kinds of attitudes? Think about what it is that Macleod is suggesting. Why did he tell this story about this quite quirky older man? What's he wanting readers to think? Is he lamenting the loss of this kind of character, of spirit? Does he think it's valuable enough that people should reflect on it and try and adopt some of Archibald's ways? Give it some thought and let me know what you think. Thanks. Bye for now.